Hi there, I'm David J. Fielding. I played Zordon on the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, and as Zordon would say,
"May the power protect you."
Broadcasting just steps away from the world-famous Miami University campus in the heart, I say, of the fabled scenic beauty of Northwest Ohio. Just outside the city of Cincinnati, you're listening to Don't Encourage This, a series of interviews and conversations with artists, creatives, interfaith voices, and nerds. I'm your host, Mark Von Bullock. I'm a minister in the Presbyterian Church USA. This edition of the program, I welcome David J. Fielding as my guest. David Fielding is an actor, writer, and voiceover artist who, among his many accomplishments, played the character of Zordon on the original Mighty Morphin Power Rangers TV series, which first aired on Fox Kids in August of 1993. Aside from serving as a mentor for superheroic teenagers with attitude on Saturday mornings, David is a prolific author and novelist. His short fiction has been published in anthologies such as Alter Egos, Capes and Clockwork, and Something Strange is Going On. He is the author of the superhero novel Vigilance and the Lincoln Bright series. The most recent installment, Gaunts, was released in July of 2021. David is a trained dramatic actor who holds a BFA from Texas State University, formerly known as Southwest Texas State University, and an MFA in acting from the University of Pittsburgh. In addition to his iconic role on the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, David has enjoyed a prolific career in theater and improv. During our conversation, we talk at great length about some of his favorite roles and his most formative experiences on the theater stage. We also talk about his deep love of comic books and B-movies growing up as a child, something he and I share. His deep understanding of these genres, combined with a trained theater background, actually proved to be his secret weapons in beating out the competition and landing an iconic role on the biggest children's television show in the world. David shares some of the behind-the-scenes secrets on how a giant floating head in a tube is filmed for live action. Spoiler alert, it turns out that filming in Hollywood is not nearly as glamorous as one imagines. He also reflects on his personal struggles navigating Hollywood as a young actor, his relationship with the Power Rangers franchise today, and where he hopes future storylines might be headed. David Fielding joins us over Zoom on this edition of the program. David Fielding, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast. It's such a thrill to get to talk to you.
Nice to meet you, and I'm happy to be here.
I read something about you the other day that I thought was really interesting, and that's that you grew up really being inspired by the original 1960s Batman TV show with Adam West. Is that right?
Well, it was part of the stuff that I would watch growing up. My father was in the Air Force and my mother was English. He met her while he was stationed over in England. And after all of us kids were born in the States, he got stationed back in England for a while. My earliest memories are of living in England and watching British television, and the 60s Batman series was, I guess, might have been in syndication at that point, but I mean, it was on the rotation on British television along with Doctor Who, The Avengers, and a bunch of other things. So from an early age, I was inspired by campy TV and adventure TV and Get Smart and a bunch of stuff. Adam West and Burt Ward were influences on my childhood. Yeah.
I also grew up loving the original Adam West Batman TV show. And what's so fascinating is, like, you know, when you watch it as an adult, of course, you see how funny it is, you see how campy it is, and you can sort of tell that a lot of that humor is intentional. But when you were a kid watching it, it's serious stuff. I mean, it just seems like that's Batman.
Yeah. I mean, you don't really pick up on Adam West's cadence when he speaks, but then when you see him side by side with William Shatner as Captain Kirk, I mean, you get this sort of like stylized dialogue, and it's really great, you know, to be able to mimic that as a kid in school, and you win friends by doing impressions of famous people. So, you know, I grew up mimicking Adam West and William Shatner and Tim Conway and just all these people that I grew up with on. That sort of like jump-started my interest in doing theater and being on television, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, you were also into comic books and things like that as a kid, too. Is that right?
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, I was a huge Marvel fan. I liked Superman and Batman as well, but I really gravitated toward the Avengers and Werewolf by Night and Planet of the Apes. Marvel had them as part of their graphic novels, their black and white comics that they would do with like Conan the Barbarian. And yeah, I grew up with all that stuff. I was a geeky nerd from the get-go. Yeah.
I love it. I love it so much. When you and I were first emailing about doing this, I did a little bit of light internet stalking of you, as I'm wont to do when folks are coming on the show. I found an interview that you did at I think it might have been at a convention. It was with some guy. I don't remember exactly who it was, but you were talking about your love of Planet of the Apes. And the interviewer was talking about heroes like Batman and Superman and things like that. And then you mentioned Planet of the Apes, and the interviewer said, "Oh yeah, well, Charlton Heston, he is a hero." To which you responded, "Yeah, but I was kind of rooting for the apes," which I thought was really funny.
Yeah, well, I mean, I kind of agree with Heston's character, because Heston's character, very early on in the film, after they crash land on the planet, one of his fellow astronauts is asking him, "Well, why are you here? You know, you've done this big sort of like psychological profile of me. I mean, you know, what's your story?" And Heston's character, Taylor, basically says, "I just have to believe that there's something out there better than man."
Oh, wow.
And so I think that sort of like is one of those lines that stuck with me. You can take Planet of the Apes at face value, and it's this, you know, sort of great sci-fi story that pits, you know, topsy-turvy, apes are on top, man are on the bottom kind of thing.
Right.
It does probe a lot of questions about what is our place in the universe, where do we stand, why are all of our stories about us?
Yeah.
It's very interesting stuff. And of course, Rod Serling, you know, did the screenplay, that wonderful shocker twist of an ending that when people first saw it on the screen must have been like completely mind-blowing. You know, by the time I saw it, being like 10 or 11 years old, you know, the secret was out. Everybody knew what the twist ending was, but at the time, that must have been a really a big mind-blowing thing for people at the time.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah, and that's of course is the famous twist ending where he winds up on the beach and we see the Statue of Liberty, and yeah. People know. I'm spoiling what, like a 50, 60-year-old movie here or something like.
Right.
No, I agree 100%, and I love when those styles and genres of storytelling can kind of do that, where like you said very eloquently, you can sort of enjoy it on a surface level, but if you're willing to go down a little bit deeper, you realize that there are other certain questions that some of these stories gently invite you to think about, like our own sense of moral superiority in the case of Planet of the Apes and things like that.
And the way the apes run their society is very authoritarian. You know, they keep a tight lid on information, and they tolerate science, but they're not, you know, really sure if they need to promote it, that kind of thing. And there's all this conversation about, you know, the lawgiver, and their sort of belief system is part of the whole thing. So it's a deep movie.
Yeah. Well, and Planet of the Apes has a few things in common with another genre that I read that you really enjoyed as a kid, and I was delighted to learn this because I also enjoyed this genre as a kid, although I did not know what it was called when I enjoyed it growing up. It's a Japanese genre called tokusatsu. In Japanese, for those listening who may not be familiar, it literally means special filming or special effects, and it typically refers to, we would probably call monster science fiction movies, but live action, lots of heavy special effects, stylized visuals, explosions, people in costumes and creatures, giant monsters. Probably the Godzilla movies would probably be the first movies that we as Americans might.
Yeah, the kaiju and Super Sentai, but there's a lot of Japanese tokusatsu that does have a lot of like ape imagery in it. I remember watching the Sentai show Spectre Man, and his main villain was Dr. Gory, which was like this ape character. So yeah.
And as I'm sure our listeners are probably piecing together by now, when one describes the genre of tokusatsu, you know, one can't help but think, wow, that sounds an awful lot like Power Rangers.
Yes. Yep, it's part of that whole thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But I think that it's kind of cool just when thinking about that part of your story. This was a genre that you enjoyed growing up, and then you got to contribute in your own artistic life to.
Yeah, I mean, when I went in for the audition for the show and they told me what it was about, I was like, oh yeah, I know, I get this. I know what it's all about, because I grew up with Ultraman and Spectre Man, and I loved Godzilla growing up, and I used to watch Godzilla versus King Kong on Saturday afternoon television whenever they would run it, or late on Friday nights, they would have like a Gamera film fest and you'd see the big giant turtle in space. And I loved all that stuff. So yeah, I was like, oh, cool. I get to be part of that. Oh, awesome.
What is it about that genre that you think resonates, especially with young people? Power Rangers is kind of part of that genre, but these other stories are part of it too. And it does seem that it speaks to young people especially. Why do you think that is?
Personally, I think it has to do with because a lot of the Sentai shows and a lot of the middle Godzilla films were very child-oriented. There was always like a child who was sort of like a main character. He would either be a friend of Godzilla or cared about Godzilla. And then there was, of course, Son of Godzilla, where you had the baby Godzilla character that had like a human playmate or whatever. So I think it has a lot to do with there's the transformation that happens with Power Rangers where you get these plain run-of-the-mill teenagers or high school students who then transform into superheroes.
Yeah.
And I think that is a very common fantasy for kids is that I'm powerless as an 8-year-old. I have to obey the rules. I have to obey my parents. I have to go to school every day. There are things I need to do. But if I was a Power Ranger, I could escape all of that.
Right.
Could transform and be somebody who had the power to do something cool and awesome rather than just sit behind my desk every day and learn my math tables and all that kind of thing. So I think it's very popular with kids to want to change into something else just for a little while.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because Power Rangers was kind of like lightning in a bottle. It exploded and became part of the pop culture zeitgeist, and it was everywhere. And I think one of the reasons for that is if you have any other show of that type, like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or He-Man or something like that, that show would be on the TV, the cartoon would be on or whatever. But then you had to wait 6 months for Christmas before the toys came out. But when Power Rangers went on the air, the toys were already on the shelves. So the kids were at home watching the show and they had the action figures in their hands. So it was very hands-on for them to become a Power Ranger. They could do it right then and there. So I think that was part of the success as well.
That makes a lot of sense. And one other thing that I've thought about occasionally when thinking about that show is Haim Saban, when he cast those actors to play the Power Rangers, he cast, they were teenagers in quotes in the show, but they were, 22, 23-year-old, adults. He didn't cast like 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds to be the Power Rangers. He cast like older kids. And I do sometimes wonder if there was something about kids looking at these characters who were not only superheroes, but also maybe kind of felt like, oh, that's like my big brother, or there's something aspirational about that they were just a little bit older, maybe, or maybe I'm reading too much into it. I don't know.
No, I think because the show was really directed at 5, 6, and 7, and 8-year-old kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so those kids would look up to the junior high and high school kids. That was the next stage of their development. I'm going to be there in a couple of years.
Right.
I'm going to be a high school student. So there was this sort of ladder of progression, like I'm not a high school student yet, but I can be there. And if I get to be in high school, then there's a chance I get to be a Power Ranger. And so it's sort of that, step ladder of learning how the world works, learning, to gain a little bit more power, a little bit more control about how you do your homework and when you do your homework and that kind of thing. And then eventually, I can break free of all of that.
You grew up in Texas, is that right?
No, my father settled here after he retired from the Air Force. We kind of grew up all over the place.
Okay.
We were born in Florida. We spent time in England. We're stationed in Michigan for a while. Then we spent a good decade in Colorado Springs and the mountains. And then we were in Washington State for a while. So we did a lot of traveling and all over. So I didn't grow up anywhere. I mean, we settled here in Texas, and that's where I finished high school.
When did you first have an inkling that you might have an interest in theater and acting? I mean, did you know as a kid that you were interested in that, or was that more like adolescence, high school stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I used to act out my comic books for my parents. For one of our presents, when we were living in Colorado and living on the Air Force Academy, my dad brought home a parachute that had like a big rip in it. So we had this big orange and white parachute that we could use to play around with as kids. And I turned it into a stage curtain, and I would act out my comic books for my parents when we were in Washington State and I was going to school there, I had a choice of 2 electives one year in school, and one of them was theater and the other one was choir. In the fall, when school started, I was in this drama class, and I know that we were going to do like a production of It's a Wonderful Life, Charlie Brown, or something like that. It was a Charlie Brown themed show. But something in the schedule messed up, and so they switched our electives, and I went from being in the theater class to being in choir. And then when it came back around the next semester to go back to the drama class, I kind of chickened out. And I'm not sure I wanted to do that because I kind of got a little bit of stage fright when we were rehearsing during the first part of it. And I had been using voices and humor as a way to make friends wherever I went because we changed schools every couple of years.
Yeah.
And so it was easier to make friends on Air Force bases because everybody around me was in the same boat.
Yeah, sure.
They were transferring in from somewhere else or they were going somewhere else in, a year. So you had friends for a year, you had friends for 2 years. And then when we came back, when we settled in Texas, it was a completely different environment altogether because all of these kids have been going to school all their lives. And we were sort of like the invaders,
And you don't even know how long you're even going to be there, too.
Right. And so, I started off by doing what I always did and just, did my funny voices and made friends. And I think it was my sophomore year. I was taking a French class in high school, and they had a talent show in the spring. The French class that I was taking, my friend Ron and I were big fans of Steve Martin and Saturday Night Live. And so we did the Wild and Crazy Czech Brothers. And we did this sort of like talent show within a talent show where we were like the hosts of this thing. And then other people would do characters from Saturday Night Live and we introduced them. But when Ron and I walked out on stage that night doing our Wild and Crazy thing, there was this huge eruption of applause.
Yeah.
And I was like immediately bitten and said, okay, that's what I want to do.
That'll do it.
That's the feeling I want to have. So yeah, that's started the whole thing.
I think many of us who were theater kids growing up had a moment like that where we were sort of like shy, nerdy outcasts, and then you just get that first round of applause, and you're like, "Oh, this is a thing? Like this can happen?"
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. More of that, please.
That electric bolt of, "Oh, they like me."
Affirmation. And we should also say, I mean, you received formal training in acting. You have a Bachelor of Fine Arts from Texas State University. Is that right?
Yeah. At the time, it was Southwest Texas State. It's now just Texas State in San Marcos. I got my BFA there, and then I went on to the University of Pittsburgh and got my Master of Fine Arts. Looking back on it, I probably spent too many years in school, but yeah.
I'm in no position to judge you about that. But you did a lot of theater during your time in Pittsburgh and Texas. And I was curious if there were any productions during that time of your life that were particularly memorable or formative to you as an actor or as an artist.
Yeah. After I graduated high school, I did a year and a half of junior college in the town where I graduated high school. And I got to do Eugene Ionesco's Rhinoceros there.
I was also in a radio play version of that in college.
Yeah.
That some student group produced it. I don't even remember what they did with it. I don't know if they broadcast it on student radio or it just went away. I have no idea. It's a great play, but it's very surreal. Yeah,
it was great because they made these like wire-framed rhinoceros heads for the cast members that would turn into rhinoceroses. So they would come on stage with like these copper horns and stuff on their heads and walk around. It was pretty cool.
Oh, I love it.
And then when I went to Southwest, I met one of the instructors and did a number of productions for him. And he really influenced a lot of what I think of as grand theater because a lot of his shows were epic in scope.
Yeah.
He always had these like really elaborate sets that would sort of like draw the audience into them. We did Romeo and Juliet, and the entire set was made from this pour foam that they shot on the floor and created like these sweeping staircases and balconies where, Romeo and Juliet did their scene, and we did the sword fights in between like these columns and stuff, and it was very epic.
It must have been amazing for the audience.
Yeah. And then we did the sesquicentennial show called A Cloud of Witnesses, which was about the Alamo. and that was the 150th anniversary of the birth of Texas or whatever. And so we did that show, and I got to play the devil in that. So it was pretty fun. And then I was lucky enough to get cast as Antonio Salieri in Amadeus.
Oh, nice.
And got to play that part. And talk about an epic production, because in the stage play, they talk about the operas and the music that Mozart writes, and you hear it over the speakers and stuff. But Jay, he really wanted to up the ante. So it was a joint production between the theater department and the music department, and we brought all of the opera onto stage.
Oh, how cool.
Whenever Salieri and Mozart would go to the opera, we actually watched the Magic Flute, the scene from the Magic Flute. And it was this grand, sweeping, completely epic production, and I loved every minute of it. And then when I was at the University of Pittsburgh, one of the guest artists that they brought in to sort of like have like a weekend guest artist was F. Murray Abraham. And so I got to talk to him about playing the role of Salieri, and he was very gracious and was like, yes, that's a great part. So it was a lot of fun. Yeah.
God, that must have taken forever to put that production together, just the way you're describing it. I mean, it just sounds so elaborate.
Well, I mean, we started rehearsals in January, and the show went up at the end of March or early April, something like that. So it was fast. But, when you're 23 or 24 years old, I mean, you have all the energy in the world, and
yeah, you just do it.
We would rehearse for 5 hours every night, and then, go to a house party or something.
It's that 19-year-old metabolism, baby.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, moving into sort of the late 80s going into the early 90s, you were in an improv troupe in Pittsburgh called Friday Night Improvs. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. When I first went to the University of Pittsburgh, that was my first time like really sort of being outside of my bubble, because I had lived in Texas. I had been close to my family. I was always within driving distance of them. But here I was like in another state altogether.
Yeah, sure.
I was halfway across the country from them. And it was a completely different environment, because I did go to Southwest Texas State College, which was in the hill country of Texas, but it still felt very rural. There were, you could take a 5-minute drive and you'd be in cow country, and there would, be all the sorts of open land. But this was the first time living in a city, living in an urban environment, and it changed me a little bit. It kind of opened my eyes, widened my experience a little bit, and I'm very grateful for having done that. And the way that the school worked there was that the theater program was very concentrated on the master's program, so for the graduate students.
Okay.
There was an undergraduate theater department, but there wasn't a lot of opportunity for them to be in the shows. One of my classmates, Jeff DeVincent, who now he was like the head of SCAD at South Carolina College down there. He had done improv in Chicago with Second City and stuff like that. And he said, let's do an improv show on Friday nights for the undergraduates and give them a chance to get up on stage and just go wild.
Oh, how cool.
And I was like, okay, well, what is this improv thing? I don't know if I'm familiar with that. And again, it was one of those things, kind of like being back at that talent show in high school, where you step on a stage and you don't have lines. You haven't memorized anything. You haven't rehearsed anything. It's all off the top of your head. And the first time you say something that you've made up on your own and you get the electric laugh from the audience, again, that's the electric shock in the arm of like, oh, I kind of like this.
I'm a writer now.
Yeah.
Not just an actor. Now I'm a writer.
It kind of spoiled me as an actor, I think, because I did it for so long. And when I moved out to Los Angeles, I got involved with a theater group out there called the LA Connection. They had their own theater, and they would do shows Wednesday to Thursdays, Friday and Saturday nights, Sunday matinees, improv shows. And so it sort of like ruined me as a trained actor, because it got to the point where it's like, I don't want to look at a script. I don't want to have to memorize lines.
I just want to do this.
Yeah, I just want to make it up off the top of my head. But yeah, that's Friday Night Improvs was a Friday night tradition. It was still going on for like a decade after I left. It was just a great, great experience. And a lot of funny people came and went through there. And it was A lot of laughs, a lot of good times.
I'm guessing at some point you wound up in California, because I feel like that's creeping up on about the time that Power Rangers was being developed, or am I getting confused
Yeah,
about
yeah.
that?
I mean, I went to the University of Pittsburgh in the fall of 1989, and I graduated there in the spring of 1992.
Oh, okay.
And I moved out to Los Angeles in August of 92. Haim Saban had been working on trying to get Power Rangers made since the middle 80s.
Yeah, forever. Yeah.
Yeah, he had actually shot a pilot with Mark Dacascos that they had actually filmed, but it didn't go anywhere.
Right.
And I don't think it was called Power Rangers then. It was called something else. But then he finally found somebody over at Fox Kids who understood what he was trying to do.
Yeah.
Which was, bring this Japanese footage over here and marry it with live action American footage. And Haim Saban and Shuki Levy, they were, I believe they started off as music producers. That's where they started. So they had all of these royalties from this music that they had written for shows, and they were turning that money into making other programs and, building up their brand, Saban brands. And so they finally got this thing off the ground, and I got to Los Angeles in the middle of August, got set up in an apartment, and a lot of the friends that I had made at Southwest Texas had already moved out to California while I went to go work on my master's degree. So I had a small network of friends already living in LA that I could talk to about where do I need to go? Who do I need to talk to? Where's the best place to buy the Hollywood, the Variety magazine so I could look backstage and, see where the auditions were. And one of the friends that I had made at Southwest Texas State was a wonderful woman by the name of Stacy Fish, who was working at Saban at the time in their production department as like a second AD or director's assistant for a lot of their made straight to video movies that they were doing at Saban.
Yeah. They did a lot of smaller projects back during those days, I think.
Yeah. And Stacy called me and said, "Hey, I'm working on this kid's television pilot for this company that I work for, and they're having auditions for this part that I think you'd be great for. Do you want to come in and read for it?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that's why I came to Los Angeles, this whole thing." And so she told me where it was and what time to be there. And I went down there thinking that it was going to be a cattle call, that it would be me and 15,000 other guys. And I'd read my lines into the camera for a casting director, and then I would go home and never hear anything.
Sure.
But when I got down there, I found out it was just me and this other guy. And they told us they were going to cast it this night.
Wow.
And would I be available to film next week? And I was like, yeah, of course. I'll make the time.
So had they done a cattle call already, or were they? That's so interesting.
No, it was very interesting because they were already in production for this pilot. And this was they were moving into the last week of their production cycle.
Okay.
And I'm not sure why they hadn't cast this part. I don't know if they were making the decision about whether or not the character that would eventually become Zordon would be animated, or if they just wanted to have like a static mask or something up there.
And he was originally called Zoltar, wasn't he?
Originally called Zoltar, yeah.
There's a little trivia there for you kids.
Yeah. And I think they had to change it because of the Tom Hanks big movie, because the fortune-telling box that he goes to and makes his wish to is called Zoltar.
Is that right?
Yeah, and I don't know if that was the reasoning for it or if there was just another copyright issue or whatever, but they changed it.
Oh, so fascinating. I love that stuff.
I kind of look at it this way, is that I spent almost 10 years at school training to be an actor, doing all of this theater, being in all of these shows, learning the discipline of being on time, showing up when they want you to be there.
Yeah.
Memorizing your lines when you need to memorize your lines, and know when your cue is so that when the line that introduces you happens, you're there.
Yeah.
Nobody's waiting on you, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So on some level, when I tell the story about getting cast in Power Rangers, it is one of those sort of like being in the right place at the right time, but I was prepared for that.
Yeah.
I was ready to do that.
You had the training for it.
And, I had been in LA for all of 2 months. I was taking these improv classes at the LA Connection, and I was listening to these guys at the LA Connection who had been living in LA for 20 or 30 years, trying to get a job on a TV show, trying to get into a movie. And all the near misses that they had and all the horrific audition stories that they all went through, and listening to them sort of, bitterly recount all of their stories about how tough it was to get a job in the industry. And I come into town, and within 2 months, I'm on a kids' television show, and I'm like, I don't.
So, the biggest kids television show in the world at the time.
Yeah, I mean, at the time we didn't know that because when they were working putting it together, it was just a job.
Yeah,
it was just something that was happening. But yeah, come around that next fall and it just exploded. But yeah, so I was very prepared to be there for that moment. And when we went to our separate corners to read our parts for this character, because the only instruction we were given was like, oh yeah, the character's a 10,000-year-old wizard and he's trapped in a time warp. Go.
A story as old as the hills.
The last 3 years of improv, I'm like, okay, I got that. I know what's going on. Oh, it's tokusatsu. It's kaiju. It's big monsters and big giant robots. I grew up with that. I know exactly what that is. So yeah, I was prepared. I could hear him in the corner. He was doing this really sort of interesting, humorous take on the character, and he was much more of a mad scientist Zoltar than I was.
Ah, okay.
And he was like, Power Rangers, welcome to the Power Dome. And I was like, I kind of think that's the wrong direction, but you do you, pal. And I just sat there and tried to think about how I could bring some gravitas to the character. And he was this mentor, this sort of leader. So I went for the Zeus on the mountain deep voice, and that's the voice they ended up using in the show. So, and my face. So,
what I find so fascinating about this is because, I mean, on the one hand, I mean, you can understand why this other guy would go in here and look at this script as a character named Zoltar. The show's, Power Rangers is an outrageous premise. It's totally understandable to see how an actor could look at that and be like, okay, this is camp. We're going to make this really silly. But what's fascinating to me about your decision is because you understood the genre, because you grew up with this genre, there's some part of your imagination that understood that this character needs to be there needs to be something almost kind of mythic about Zordon in a way. And it seems like you kind of instinctually steered him more in that direction. And clearly it worked because it got you the gig.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I remember very clearly going in after the other gentleman had left and meeting the original cast and meeting the producers, meeting the director, and them having me stand up on a table in front of everybody and read the part. I remember very clearly Austin St. John turning to everybody and said, well, I think we found our Zoltar.
Austin St. John, it was the actor who played Jason the Red Ranger for those playing the home game.
Correct. Yeah. And I went home that evening and, kind of felt like I did well. And then a couple of hours later, I got the phone call saying, hey, congratulations, we want to use you. And here's where we're going to film you next week. And that was that.
Yeah.
So.
I'm going to go on a sidebar for just a second. I'll tell you a little bit about my relationship with this franchise. So I grew up as a kid obsessed with Power Rangers. Like when it was first airing, like every other 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old boy, I just watched every episode. When it came on in the morning, I was just obsessed with it. Went to school talking about just all of the dweeby stuff. And probably around the age of 13, 14, fell off of it and got interested in theater, like a real cool kid.
Yeah, yeah.
And I've always had a lot of affection for Power Rangers, and then I, total other sidebar, became friends with Ron Wasserman, who did the music for it.
Yeah, wonderful guy.
That's a whole different, he's one of my favorite human beings in the world. That's a different story. But anyway, a couple years ago, I want to fast forward a couple years ago, my partner has a 10-year-old daughter, and she went through a phase for about 15 minutes where she was interested in Power Rangers, because they're all streaming now. All those old episodes are streaming. Yeah. And I kind of thought, oh, this will be fun. Like, I watched this as a kid. She's kind of curious about it. We'll watch it together. It'll be a bonding experience. And what's interesting to me, among other things, is in the scene in that first episode when the Power Rangers, the teenagers, when they first meet Zordon, they first teleport into the command center. And then Zordon appears as this head in a floating tube, and he goes, Rangers! And it hit me. I was like, oh, this is like the Wizard of Oz a little bit.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of like Dorothy and her friends showing up, and this like giant mythical sorcerer is there to imbue them with gifts and stuff. I wonder if that was like vaguely intentional, or if that's just a coincidence.
I have to think it was an influence because in The Wizard of Oz, when the wizard appears, he's kind of a green-faced giant head.
Yeah.
And when you see Zordon for the first time, he's this blue-green giant head.
Right.
He's telling these kids he wants them to become superheroes, and they're like, I don't know what you're talking about, So, yeah, I mean, it's kind of jarring the way he kind of shows up. So, yeah.
Now, my understanding has always been that the filming for Zordon was pretty quick and nasty. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I showed up it was an evening shoot. It was the last thing that they were going to shoot for the pilot. They'd been shooting for like 4 weeks. Everybody on the crew was sick. The director had the flu. So they were kind of isolated from the rest of us. And I showed up at this warehouse in Studio City somewhere. And I was brought into like this, it was like an industrial building. So the space that they had taken over for their makeup room, it looked like the washroom for some industrial company or something like that, where guys would come in and take off their dirty overalls and take a shower or whatever. And so it was very slapdash. It felt very sort of like, do they have money for this kind of thing?
Is this a real TV show?
Yeah, I mean, and I was very aware that this was a non-union shoot.
Yeah.
It didn't pay very much.
Notoriously so.
Yeah, but I'm in LA and I'm being shot for a TV show.
Yeah.
Where do you want me to sit? What do you want me to do?
Right.
That was my whole going into it. And then they took me out into the room after they shaved all my hair off. They had glued my ears back and darkened my eyebrows and slathered the front part of me with green latex paint. So the only thing that was going to show up was like my neck and my head.
Okay. Were you against like a green screen? Was it chroma keyed or?
Yeah, it was chroma keys, and it was just this big green background, and I was sitting in like what was like a barber chair with like towels across the front of me. And we did the lines, they did the lights and they did the test and the microphone test, and the original cast was there, but they were just shadows to me because the lights were so bright I couldn't see them.
Oh, wow.
We did the lines back and forth a couple of times while they were filming, and they took shots from different angles, and then they had me do a bunch of pickup expressions where I would just like make funny expressions with my face or turn my head in a different way and say the line a different way. And we were there for about 4 hours, maybe 5, something like that, and doing this thing back and forth. And it was announced that this was my first job in the city, and people gave me a round of applause for that. And then there was like, that's it. We're wrapped on Dino Rangers, folks. And then I went to my job because I had a third shift job at some video company that was broadcasting satellite movies on the Dish Network. And I would sit there and watch the system to make sure it didn't go down during the night. And I did that, I don't know, for 5 or 6 weeks while I was living there.
Yeah.
And they were like, well, we'll call you if the show gets picked up, because at this point it hadn't been picked up yet.
Right.
I think they knew it was going to get picked up, but they were just telling us, to sort of protocol or keep up appearances that, hey, we don't know what's going on with it. So yeah, I left there, and my girlfriend at the time was very upset that they shaved all my hair off. And,
Now, did you know they were going to do that? I mean, I have to assume that they must have said something, or was it just like?
I think I got a phone call the day of saying, "Hey, are you going to be okay if we cut your hair off?"
Okay.
And I was like, "It'll grow back. Yeah, sure, I guess." I mean, I did think it was funny that they couldn't spring for a bald wig, but I guess they wanted to, make it authentic or whatever. But
right.
I didn't have a problem with it. My girlfriend at the time was not very happy about it. I just wore hats a lot until my hair grew back.
Yeah.
And that was sort of like the bittersweet thing about being cast as Zordon on Power Rangers was that when I did get the phone call a couple of weeks later saying, "Hey, congratulations, this show's been picked up," I was like, "Great, wonderful. What's the protocol here? When do I report to set? Who's my main point of contact? That kind of thing."
Yeah, what do we do?
They're like, "Oh, well, we're not going to film you anymore. We're just going to bring you in to do voices for the character." And I was like, "Oh, that kind of
sucks.
that's a little bit of a bummer," because that meant that I was not going to get the experience that I was hoping for, which was being on set every day,
Right.
learning how the set worked every day.
Yeah.
What was the protocol about the crew? Learning about the crew, learning about how they did their jobs.
Like all the experience that would be really valuable as you're trying to get into this industry.
Yeah, and that was something I was really looking forward to was what's it like to go and work on a TV show every day? What's that like? And I didn't have that. I would just get a phone call like every 4 or 5 weeks saying, "Hey, we've got lines for you. Come in and do the voices." And I would go down to the engineering studio and they would roll the footage where my character was going to be speaking, and I would see what they were doing. And Tony Oliver, who was the head writer at the time, was gracious enough to tell me what was going on in the show, to give me a little bit more of a context and stuff. And I got to learn and got to know the guys who were working the engineering booth and the soundboard and stuff, and ended up doing some voice roles for them on side projects that they were doing, which was great because of all the years that I spent in school learning the craft of becoming an actor and learning how to act and learning how to analyze a script and create a character and do all that stuff. They teach you how to get the job. They don't teach you about how to survive as an actor, though. They don't teach you about networking and keeping in contact with people and who you should reach out to and what to say at this moment or what not to say at this moment.
Right.
And
All that real world stuff.
yeah. And so that's one of the reasons I felt like I spent 10 years at school doing a lot of great work and learning a lot of great things and having a lot of great experiences, but it didn't really teach me anything about what it was like to be in Los Angeles and do the grind of going through auditions, or had I gone to New York, what it would have been like to be in New York and do that sort of thing.
Right.
And I guess that was just sort of the standard procedure of what everybody else before me had ever gone through. It's like, we're going to teach you this, but once you walk out the door, good luck, kid. You're on your own.
And that's probably what they still teach now. I assume.
Yeah.
I mean, if you go to drama school or whatever, you probably still learn a lot of the craft of acting, but that's, it's show business and there's a business side to it.
Right. And it's really strange because today, what with the internet and you have a mini movie studio in your hand with your phone, you can make your own movies. You can become your own star. The TikToks and the Instagram reels, there are people who have made a career without ever studying anything about what it's like to be an actor or a producer or a director. They just do it.
Yeah.
And so I think that landscape is all changing, and it's a very interesting time.
Yeah.
Very interesting time.
It is. So you came in and basically shot all of the, for lack of a better word, the floating head stuff in a 4-hour period. And then you came in semi-regularly to just record the dialogue for the character. Yeah. And one of the things that you forget when you're a kid watching Power Rangers, but you pick up on very, very quickly if you're an adult rewatching it, is that Power Rangers reused the same footage over and over and over and over and over and over again. And when you look at Zordon, he's in this tube. It looks like he's in an aquarium. Everything's blurry. His face is distorted. And you really can't see what his mouth is doing or not doing. So they really could have just used the same tape of your performance for 50 episodes or whatever.
Yeah, for the first few episodes, you can see Zordon's mouth move. The words may not match, but his lips are moving.
Yeah.
And then they started to blur it out. And then when you get into later seasons, Zordon just becomes a static image. He doesn't move at all.
Yeah.
His mouth doesn't move at all, but you still hear the voice.
Yeah, he's like a Hanna-Barbera cartoon.
It was very, very interesting. But yeah, I mean, that's the reason they made $1 billion the first year, is that they produced the show cheaply by reusing the footage over and over. So from a business standpoint, that's a great thing.
Sure. Sure.
It is. I mean, it's really smart.
It wasn't great for you guys, but it was great for I'm Saban.
Yeah, it sucked for us. We were like, oh, what the heck, And then when you hear the stories about what everybody was paid,
then
it gets,
It's gruesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we could go on and on and on.
But I mean, I look at it this way. It's like that was normal.
Yeah.
That's
sure.
what Hollywood was or is. They will hire the people who are willing to do the job because those people have aspirations.
Yeah.
I want to be on a movie. I want to be in a TV show. What do I need to do?
Right.
Okay? sign on the dotted line and you get to be in the TV show.
Right.
Oh, here's your $150 check. Well, what about my residuals? Oh, it's non-union. There are no residuals.
Yeah.
There's no protection. There's no union. There's nothing. There's nobody fighting for your side. I mean, one of the people that I met at the LA Connection Improv Theater was Danielle Koenig, who was Walter Koenig's daughter.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I went to dinner with Walter over at his house. Walter introduced me to his lawyer. His lawyer overlooked the contract that I signed, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm sorry, buddy, you're screwed."
Yeah.
And that it's just I thought of it as just like, well, that's my Hollywood story.
Sure.
That's my welcome to Hollywood, kid, and everybody gets to take advantage of. Everybody gets taken for a ride on a certain sense. So, it was just standard operating procedure as far as I was concerned. And that was one of the reasons it made it easy to leave LA, because I was 29 when I went out there.
Yeah. Okay.
My ability to put up with BS, my tolerance for that was at a point where it's like, yeah, I'm not going to put up with this.
Sure.
Whereas if I'd gone out there when I was 22, I'd be like, okay, yeah, I'll put up with that, because I would have the energy to put up with more of that kind of stuff, rather than sort of look out for myself and be like, well, I guess I can do that, and I'll do this and I'll do that.
Yeah. And what other choice do you have? I mean, you mentioned Austin St. John a little earlier, who again was the actor who played Jason the Red Ranger, the original Red Power Ranger. He has told a story that when he was offered the part, he got a very similar contract where it's like, we're going to pay you nothing and just we own you. And I want to say, I think he had a moment where he's like, well, I think I really need to like take this home and have it looked over by an attorney and da-da-da. And some casting agent or producer or somebody looked at him and said, hey, right behind that door is a line of like 200, 300 other actors. And if you don't sign this contract, one of them will. So, think about it if you want to, but we're not going to. Yeah. There's no negotiating here, and it's like either you get the job or you don't. I mean, at a certain point, it's like, what can you? There's nothing you can do. It sucks, but it's
right. I left LA right after the show went on the air.
Oh, okay.
I was burned out. I did the voice of the character for the first 31 episodes.
Okay.
So whenever people say that they remember the voice of Zordon, I think they remember Robert's voice more than mine.
This is Robert Manahan, who
took over the voice after I left.
Yeah.
But I think he did a great job of mimicking what I had created for the character. And my meeting with Haim Saban about when I wanted to leave, Tony was like, can you just stick it out for 6 months? In 6 months, it's going to blow up. You'll see. It's going to get better. And I was like, I'm burned out, dude. I don't think I want to be here anymore. I'm not auditioning. I'm not doing things. I didn't feel connected to the show in any sort of way.
Yeah.
Very much like Zordon, I was separated from everybody. And so I was like, it was very easy for me to make decisions like, well, I did this. I'm a part of it. If they want to replace me, they can replace me. I just want to leave.
Yeah, sure.
And Haim Saban was like, why do you want to leave? Are you unhappy? And I'm like, no, I'm not unhappy. I just don't think I want to live in Los Angeles anymore. And he goes, all right. We find another voice. And that was it. And it was very clear to me, well, if I'm that replaceable.
I'm laughing because crying would be sad. I'm not. The reason I'm laughing is it just like well, I want to be careful what I say here. I feel like every Haim Saban story I've heard sounds exactly the same. It's like someone gets to that point where like, I can't do this anymore. And he's like, bye-bye.
Yeah. I mean, he was a cutthroat businessman. It was like, if this is going to cost me money, I'd rather not do it. And that was the thing. I think one of the reasons I got hired was that I was not a name. I was not anybody who was going to give anybody grief. I was not going to contact a lawyer and say, hey, we need to negotiate this. They were like, no, you're one of the guys who's eager enough to come in here and do this. We're going to use you. And that's what they did.
After all this happened, you got interested at some point down the road in wanting to write and be an author. And you've written a number of wonderful books. Was that a natural transition into that, or did that come later on?
I started fiddling around with writing stories when I was still in high school. I wrote my brother and sister a Christmas story that I read them one year. I played a lot of Dungeons and Dragons, so I was writing stories for the people that would play in the game, and I had to create dialogue for characters, and I learned a lot about, how to stitch together dramatic moments that make up stories by playing Dungeons and Dragons. And then, of course, doing theater, I was learning about how character arcs and the arc of the script and that sort of thing. And I learned a lot about how to tell a story, how to dramatize a story. And when I was actually out in LA and got to know Tony Oliver, I was sort of like pestering him saying, "Hey, I would like to write a script for the show. Can I
Oh,
write
nice.
And Tony was like, "Yeah, sure. Give me some ideas, pitch me some ideas, write me some pages, let me see them."
Yeah.
And Tony was very encouraging. And
Oh, that's cool.
again, had I stayed out there, I probably would have ended up writing episodes or trying to write episodes, learning how to write episodes, that kind of thing.
Well, did you ever pitch him any ideas? Or?
Yeah. I had actually pitched him a birthday episode one that I think they had one already written for Zach, which is why they didn't choose mine, because Zach had a birthday episode.
Okay.
There were a couple of others that I wrote, but I don't think I was really grasping what they were going for with the show, because mine became a little overly dramatic at points where they were like, "Well, we're not doing PG-13 stuff. We want to keep it down here, rated G with extra cheese. That's what we're doing." And I was like, "Oh, okay."
It's not Ionesco, David.
Yeah.
But maybe it should have been. It could have been.
Well, I mean, you had Lord Zed. He had no skin. I mean,
Yeah, he was a frightening villain.
And you could see the blood moving through his things. I was like, wow, that's kind of, how does a 6-year-old look at that? And that's crazy.
Yeah.
After I left LA, I moved back to the East Coast and my neighborhood of friends in Pittsburgh, and got involved doing voices for video games.
Oh, nice.
And then I ended up writing a couple of clue books for video games. Then I ended up being a voice coach for video games, where I would bring in my friends to do voices for the video games that were being produced, and I would voice direct them to do that. And then moved outside of Boston and got involved in the gaming industry in Boston, doing voices for a number of companies in Boston. Then got hired as a designer for video games at Mad Dog Software, and had to write scenarios and write backstories and write dialogue. But it wasn't until about, I want to say 2010, 2011, where I started to say, okay, write a short story. You have all these ideas. You've written snippets of stuff from these campaigns that you've run in D&D. Write a short story about something. And I was still on Facebook at the time, and there were a number of Facebook groups that were basically story calls for indie magazines that were like, "Hey, we're doing a steampunk theme. If you have an idea for a steampunk story, send it our way. And, because we'll put it in our magazine or whatever."
Sure.
And so there were a number of groups like that. And I would always select those ones that was stuff that I wanted to write about, which is superhero fiction or giant monster fiction. Because I'm never going to be the great American novelist. I'm not going to write Ethan Frome or anything like that. I'm like, no, there's got to be action. There's got to be two-fisted guys and doing all sorts of stuff.
Well, that's the kind of stories that spoke to you growing up.
Yeah. And again, it was sort of the same thing as about being in the movies, because as a kid, I was like, that's the kind of movie I want to be in. I want to do that.
Yeah.
And so I would put myself in the stories. I'm in the story. I'm doing this. And so that was the great thing. And luckily, I guess I was competent enough that people were like, "Oh, we really like this. We'd like to buy it from you."
Yeah.
So I was like, "Oh, okay. So that story made me $25. That's pretty cool." And I got a copy of the book. Oh, that's great. And I really started to feel like, okay, well, I can do this. I can do this. And then you get the thing, well, short stories are fun. Can you write a novel? Can you actually write a full-length novel? Gave that a shot and did that. And that's continuing to do what I do now. So, yeah.
That's awesome. Hasbro, which I guess currently owns Power Rangers, is that right?
Yep.
In the last number of years, they've been leaning a little bit into the nostalgia that people have for the original series. I know they've done a lot with the comics. They've brought back original cast members in recent iterations of the show. They did a big 30th anniversary TV movie, which our friend Ron Wasserman came back and did the music for that. David Yost, who played Billy, the original Blue Ranger, he came back as a regular cast member in a recent season. It seems like Hasbro has a sense that there is some audience nostalgia for that original era that you were a part of. if the stars ever aligned, would you ever be open to coming back to the franchise if you were asked? What's your relationship with the fandom and the franchise today?
Yeah, of course I would. I think the fans would love that. Because the one thing I learned very early on, because once I left LA, I kind of forgot about the show.
Sure.
It wasn't anything that I was paying attention to. It wasn't what I would watch on television. So I had no idea if it was still going on. It was just an interesting anecdote I could tell to people at parties. Oh, yeah, I was on this kid's television show or whatever. But once Facebook came along and I started to get messages from strangers saying, hey, did you play Zordon on Power Rangers? And I was like, yeah, whatever happened to that show? And the internet wasn't the repository for information as it is now.
Yeah, sure.
And, and you had to do a lot of digging. But then I found out, oh, wow, that show's still going on? And there are different seasons, and
that train's still chugging along.
That's very interesting. And then I got invited to my first convention in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania called TechShowCon in 2011. And that was the first time I got to sit on stage in front of an audience of Power Ranger fans and understand the gravity of what the show was for people. Because I heard stories about how I came from a broken home and this show really saved me. And it was the only thing that brought light to my day, my week, was to have this show. And I just wanted to say thank you for being my surrogate dad.
Oh,
hearing that for the first time was a bell going off on my head saying, you really need to honor this. You need to treat this with a little bit more weight than just sort of like passing it off as something I did. You have to respect what these people cared for because, you may have only been on it for a very short time because I felt like my contribution to the show was very minimal.
Sure.
Because I wasn't there. I wasn't on set. I didn't do a whole lot of work. But listening to these people's stories, you thought that I was there with them every day.
Right.
And so I had to accept the responsibility that I need to, to be there for them now. That's what I continue to try to do because it's been a very humbling and surreal experience to know that people all around the world know who I am.
Yeah.
Who watched me growing up and come and tell me their stories whenever I'm at a convention. And I've had people fall apart at the table and I've put them together with a hug and it's something that means something to people. And it hasn't helped but, change me a little bit and make me a little bit more open, more giving, more welcoming. That was the message of the show. It's like, we're all in this together. Stand up for your friends, be there for each other, and we can do this together.
And for all of Haim Saban's foibles, he was very intentional about making that an inclusive and diverse show. I mean, every iteration of that show had a diverse cast. There were people of color, people of different nationalities, different backgrounds. For all the cheesiness and all of the "it's Morphin time," that show really did go out of its way to represent all of the audience. And I have a lot of respect for that.
When they transform into the Power Rangers, that could be anybody.
Yeah.
That could be you.
It could, yeah.
And I think that's the message that they were saying. It's like, there's Jason and Billy and Kimberly and Trini and Zach and Tommy, but that could be you.
Yeah.
I think that's the truth, and I think that's what a lot of the kids took away from it. And, I see them dress up all the time and, what do you think of my Tommy cosplay? And I'm like, I think it's fantastic. Great. You're the best. That's awesome.
That's so beautiful. I love that. Because that's powerful stuff. That's powerful stuff for young people. And at a formative time in your life, that's powerful stuff. You touched on something that I thought was really interesting. And I think this is so true in art. I mean, when you create a piece of art, almost any time, whether it's the books that you're writing or a show like Power Rangers or theater or improv, it goes off and has a life of its own. Yeah. And, to you, the experience of playing Zordon may have been 4 hours in a back room filming and then coming in for some dialogue recording. And then, okay, I got to go back to working at the station. And then it goes off and has this whole other life and this whole other impact. Like the audience's experience is so profoundly different. And you hear stories about like that in theater too, where someone will go to see a play and they'll just be in tears. I mean, it's just so moving and so profoundly touching. And then they, talk to the actor backstage afterwards or at the stage door, and the actor's like, well, it kind of sucked. I mean, you should have been at the last night's show. This one, we really flubbed up. It's just, art is like that. And I think there's something kind of weird and beautiful about that. Who knows what Hasbro is going to do with this franchise moving forward. But it seemed to me, I don't think that there's a new season currently in production, but it seemed like the very last storylines they did were certainly hinting very heavily that Zordon is out there somewhere.
Well, I found that to be very interesting because for the longest time, the idea was that Zordon is dead.
Yeah.
That when Andros shattered the power chamber, Zordon was dead.
Spoiler alert for folks listening, like for 25 years ago, they killed off Zordon in Power Rangers in Space, I think it was called. Right.
And a lot of people didn't want Zordon to come back because they felt that would cheapen his sacrifice.
Yeah.
By doing that.
It's actually a very well-written storyline. I mean, there's a lot of storylines in Power Rangers that are very cheesy and hokey, but I've talked to Ron about this. That Power Rangers in Space storyline, it's a very well-written and emotional storyline that sort of culminates in this sacrifice that Zordon makes.
Yeah, because they had planned on ending the show there. That was going to be the button on the whole franchise.
It's almost operatic anyway, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I cut you off.
No, that's fine. I mean, but that when I was watching the Once and Always, and they were saying his name.
Yeah,
Billy was looking for Zordon, and I was like going, "Oh wow, that's really interesting that they're sort of introducing this idea that Zordon is still out there."
Yeah,
because for the longest time it was like, nope, Zordon is gone and done and gone. That's it.
Yeah, Well, not only did they mention it in the Once and Always, but then the following year, they did another season of the show where they brought David Yost back, and they mentioned it again.
Yeah.
They bring it up a second time. When I saw that, I was like, okay, something is cooking here. Someone at some point was thinking, we want to bring this character back.
Yeah, and there's the character of Zato who becomes one of the morphing masters, I guess. He has a conversation with his friend. It's like, there's something I used to say in moments like this. Oh, yes, may the power protect you. And it's sort of like really implied that...
The word of the Lord, thanks be to God.
Yeah, that Zordon is speaking through him. And I thought it was a missed opportunity on the production standpoint. It's like, hey, let's call Dave up and just have him say the line at the same time. So you hear Zordon's voice echoing what Zato is saying. That would have been really cool. But when Kyle Higgins did the Shattered Grid storyline for the Boom Studio Comics, we actually did a live read of that at Power Morphicon in like 2016, 2017, something like that. And so that was the first time I actually got to be on stage and act with my fellow castmates. I got to act with Barbara Goodson, who was the voice of Rita.
Oh,
we exchanged lines back and forth. And
did you get to act as Zordon in that?
Oh yeah, what was really great, and you can look it up on YouTube. I think they posted the live read there, but Kyle did a really great thing where he had adjusted my microphone so that it would have the same sort of echo effect that Zordon's voice did have on the show, and nobody knew about it until I spoke.
Oh,
so I was sitting there.
I bet that crowd must have gone nuts.
Yeah, I was sitting there, and I had Peter Adrian, who was part of the Ninja Steel cast on this side, and somebody over here. My first line is,
"To all those who hear these words."
And it echoed throughout the entire room, and the audience erupted, and Peter jumped up out of his chair and went, "That's Zordon!" And it was just this really wonderful, in-the-moment live kind of thing, and I that was great. That's one of my best experiences, so yeah.
Power Rangers lives in corporate land, and who knows what they're going to do with, IP and TV and movies and reboots, and who knows. But I hope they bring David Fielding back as Zordon at some point.
Thanks, man. That would be awesome.
Well, I wanted to ask you before we kind of wind down here, are there any way that fans can sort of connect with you on social media? Or
I dropped Facebook and I dropped Twitter because I disagree with the owners of those platforms, a lot of their policies.
Smart man.
So I'm no longer on Facebook. I'm no longer on Twitter. I am on Blue Sky, and I am still on Instagram, and I'm on TikTok. So if you want to find me, those are the 3 platforms that I'm on most of the time. And I've recently started streaming video games on Twitch with Christopher Kamen Lee, who played Andros. So it's Zordon and Andros playing video games together. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's the least he can do after killing you.
It gets a little R-rated, so,
David Fielding, it is such an honor and it's such a thrill to get to talk to you. It's so great to not only get to talk to you, but also just to hear your story, your insights onto the craft of acting. I mean, this has just been such a gift of a conversation. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mark. Great to meet you, man.
That's going to just about wrap it up for this edition of Don't Encourage This. My heartfelt thanks to David Fielding for joining us as my guest this episode. If you'd like to hear more conversations like this, you can listen to Don't Encourage This on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Player FM, the whole thing. The thing where you get the thing out of the thing. And of course, don't forget YouTube. You can contact the program at don'tencouragethis@gmail.com. From Oxford, Ohio, I'm Mark Von Bullock. Thanks again.